Imagine being 3 weeks away from losing the house you and your husband built your entire life inside, and on a morning you only showed up to because you had nowhere else to be. You raise your hand and spend your last $230 on a condemned building that everyone in town agrees is completely worthless. Vera Kowalski, 62, was not the kind of woman who took chances. She had spent 34 years organizing the Timmins Public Library by the Dewey Decimal System, filing everything in its proper place, keeping the world orderly and predictable. It was the kind of life that suited her, comfortable, quiet, built around Leonard and their little yellow house on Algonquin Boulevard with the crooked birch tree in the front yard. Then Leonard's heart stopped on a Wednesday afternoon in October while he was filling the bird feeder. He was 64 years old. He had told her that very morning, over oatmeal, that he was thinking they should drive up to Sudbury for the weekend to look at rocks. Leonard had been an amateur geologist his entire adult life, collecting specimens the way other men collected hockey cards. Their basement was full of labeled trays of quartz and fool's gold, and once a piece of native silver he'd found near an old mine site that he'd kept in a velvet box like a jewel. He was dead before the ambulance arrived. In the weeks that followed, Vera discovered things about Leonard she had never known. A second credit card, a line of credit against the house, small loans accumulated over years, quietly serviced, quietly growing. Not gambling debts, nothing shameful. Just the quiet arithmetic of a man who had always believed things would sort themselves out, borrowing slightly against tomorrow to make today more comfortable. Leonard had always said that. The best finds are always buried under the worst-looking rock, Vera. You just have to keep digging. But things had not sorted themselves out. The bank had sent the first foreclosure letter that spring, not long after the probate had cleared. The second arrived on a Tuesday in late January. The morning Vera found herself sitting in the back row of the Cochrane District Municipal Hall, still wearing her coat because the heating was barely functional, watching a tax auction she had not planned to attend. She had come because her neighbor, Mabel Forsyth, had mentioned that the municipal clerk sometimes posted job listings on the bulletin board in the hall lobby. The posting was already filled by the time she arrived. Vera had been too cold and too exhausted to walk back out into the -23 wind chill, so she had sat down in the last row of folding chairs and stared at the fluorescent lights and waited for feeling to return to her fingers. The auctioneer, a barrel-chested man named Roger Tate, was working through a list of foreclosed parcels with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery receipt. Lot 17, Roger said, flipping a laminated page. Commercial parcel, Highway 11 North, outside Elk Lake, former Starlight Lodge, plus 2 outbuildings, approximately 4 acres. Starting bid covers outstanding administrative liens. $230. Do I have a bidder? A murmur moved through the room. Someone in the third row said something that made the people around him laugh. Vera looked up. She knew the Starlight Lodge. Everyone in the district knew it. It had been a fishing resort in the 1940s and 50s, when the silver mines near Cobalt were still pulling men up from the south on the promise of quick money. At its peak, it had 40 rooms, a dining hall, a tap room. Then the mines went quiet, and the tourists stopped coming, and the family that owned it had locked the doors sometime in the late 1980s and simply never returned. For 30-odd years it had sat out on the highway, a long, low building with a hand-painted wooden sign still hanging above the door, rotting gently into the boreal forest that was slowly swallowing its edges. It has significant structural issues, Roger continued, shuffling his notes. The municipality has documented mold, a partially collapsed east wing, and the well is non-operational. Whoever takes the property takes the liability. $230. Anyone? The folding chairs creaked, no hands went up. Going once. Vera did not make a decision. She did not think it through or weigh her options. She thought about Leonard filling the bird feeder. She thought about the second foreclosure letter sitting on their kitchened table under a coffee mug. She thought, for no reason she could articulate, about his voice saying it like it was a fact about the universe. The best finds are always buried under the worst-looking rock. Her hand went up. Roger blinked. $230 from the woman in the back. "Ma'am, you understand there are ongoing environmental assessments attached to this property?" "Yes," Vera said. She did not understand this at all. Going once, going twice, his gavel came down with a crack that echoed off the institutional walls. "Sold." The man sitting in front of her turned around. He was well dressed for a municipal auction. Charcoal wool coat, silver cufflinks, the kind of face that was used to being listened to. He was perhaps 55, and he was looking at her with an expression that was trying very hard to be sympathetic. "That's a real shame," he said pleasantly. "That building has been condemned twice. You've bought yourself a very expensive headache, I'm afraid." He offered his hand. "Douglas Holt. I'm a developer, working on a few projects in the area." Vera shook it briefly. "Vera Kowalski." "You should talk to the municipality about reversing the sale," he said. "Seriously, there's no judgment. These auctions move fast. I'd hate to see someone get stuck." Vera smiled politely and went to the clerk's desk. She handed over 11 20s and a 10, signed 5 pages of documents she only half understood, and walked out into the cold holding a copy of the deed to 4 acres of collapsing lodge on Highway 11 North. She sat in her Subaru in the parking lot and stared at the windshield until it had fogged over completely from her breath. She had just spent the grocery money. She sat there for 11 minutes. Then she thought about the pipes. Old buildings had copper plumbing. The Starlight Lodge was large. Even a fraction of the copper in that structure, sold to the recycling depot in Timmins, could cover what she'd spent and then some. She had a pipe wrench in the back of the Subaru. Leonard had always kept tools in the car. She had never cleared them out. She turned the key and pulled onto Highway 11. The Starlight Lodge materialized out of the tree line as the light was starting to go thin. That particular shade of blue-grey that Northern Ontario gets in January in the late afternoon, when the sun is already behind the tree line and the sky is just deciding whether to give up entirely. The sign above the entrance was still there, though several letters had fallen away. It now read STRLIG TLDGE. The parking lot was a flat, white sheet of undisturbed snow. Vera pulled in, popped the back of the Subaru, and grabbed the pipe wrench and a heavy flashlight. She tried the main entrance. The door was not locked so much as swollen into its frame by decades of freeze and thaw. She put her shoulder against it, and it gave with a sound like a slow exhale. The smell hit her first. Not rot exactly, more like the inside of a very old book, damp paper and mildew and something underneath that she couldn't place. She clicked the flashlight on and swept the beam across the lobby. It was surprisingly intact. The front desk was still there, the wooden counter warped and grey with dust. Behind it, a pegboard of room keys, most of them still hanging. A mounted lake trout above the fireplace, its glass eyes perfectly clear. The taxidermist's work had outlasted the rest of the place, which struck Vera as almost funny. She worked for 2 hours. The cold inside the building was brutal. Without the wood stove that had presumably kept it habitable in its day, the uninsulated walls did nothing against the January air. She moved room to room with the pipe wrench, checking the plumbing, following the copper lines through the walls. Most of it had already been stripped. Someone had been here before her, not recently, but systematically, years ago, picking through everything of obvious value. By 6 in the evening, she had accumulated perhaps $40 worth of salvageable pipe, and her back was warning her in very direct language that 62-year-old bodies were not designed for this kind of work. She had been about to give up and try to make it back to Timmins before the temperature dropped further, when the weather made the decision for her. The wind had been building for the last hour. She'd registered it distantly, the way you register background noise when you're focused on something else. Now it was screaming, A proper Ontario blizzard, the kind that drops visibility to 0 inside 20 minutes and drifts the highway closed before the plows can respond. Vera stood in the lobby doorway and looked out at the wall of white where the parking lot had been, and knew, with the calm practicality of someone who had lived her whole life in the north, that she was not going anywhere tonight. She went looking for somewhere to wait it out. The back hallway of the main building led past a utility room, a linen closet that still smelled faintly of bleach, and a door marked Manager, Private. The lock had rusted away years ago. Inside, the room was remarkable for how untouched it was. The 2 exterior windows were small and set high in the wall, and their interior shutters were latched closed. No broken glass, no water damage, no vandalism. A heavy wooden desk. A reading lamp. No power, obviously, but still standing. 2 armchairs upholstered in dark green that had dried and cracked along the seams. On the walls, framed photographs, a lake, men in heavy canvas workshirts holding fish, a formal portrait of a family, a man, a woman, 3 children, standing in front of the Starlight Lodge when it was new, the sign bright and complete above their heads. Vera found a candle stub in the desk drawer and lit it with the matches she always carried in her coat pocket because Leonard had taught her that. She dragged one of the green armchairs into the corner, sat down in her coat and scarf and gloves, and turned off the flashlight to preserve the battery. The wind outside was enormous. She had not eaten since breakfast. She thought about Leonard the way she always did when things got difficult. Not in a falling-apart way anymore, but in the way you reach for a railing in the dark. He was just there. She slept. She didn't know how long she'd been under when the sound pulled her back. A slow, regular ticking, like a clock but heavier, metal against metal. Vera sat up, straight in the dark, her heart already accelerating before her conscious mind caught up. The room was black, except for the small guttering light of the candle and a faint pale line of moonlight under the door. The storm had gone quieter, and the sound was coming from the wall directly behind the desk. Tick, tick, tick. She held her breath. It stopped. She told herself it was the building contracting in the cold. Old structures did that. Leonard had explained it once, something about differential expansion in different materials. She told herself this and almost believed it. Then she turned on the flashlight and looked at the floor behind the desk. The dust was disturbed, not in the random scatter of mice or settling, in long, deliberate arcs, as though something heavy had recently been dragged or swung. The arcs converged at the wall near the corner, where a tall wooden bookshelf still held a row of molded paperback novels from the 1970s. Vera stood up slowly, walked around the desk and crouched to examine the arcs more closely. The undisturbed dust around them was an even grey. The marks were clean wood beneath. She stood and looked at the bookshelf. It was not attached to the wall. There was a gap, barely a centimetre, between the back of the shelf unit and the wall behind it, and when Vera leaned in close with the flashlight, she could see that the hinges were on the left side. The whole unit was a door. Her pulse was loud in her ears. She reached out and gave the right edge of the bookshelf a slow pull. It swung toward her on well-oiled hinges. Recently oiled, she registered distantly, which meant someone had been here. Behind it was a concrete block wall with a steel door set into it. The door was about the height of a refrigerator, fitted with a heavy lever handle and a 4-digit combination lock above it. The lock hung open on its shackle. Left that way, it seemed, when the lodge was abandoned decades before, as though whoever sealed the room had trusted the hidden shelf to do the work and saw no need to secure a door that no one would ever find. Vera stood in the doorway of the manager's office, with the flashlight in one hand and the pipe wrench in the other, and looked at that open lock for a long moment. Then she pushed the lever handle down and pulled. The steel door swung open on a breath of cold, stale air. The smell that came out was mineral, like a cave, like the inside of a rock, like Leonard's basement collection on a damp day. The room beyond was small. Concrete on all 4 sides, a single wooden table in the center. On the table, A fireproof document case, the heavy grey kind used for important papers, its lid standing open. Beside it, laid flat, a dozen rolled documents, each tied with disintegrating brown ribbon. And behind the table, pushed against the back wall, a stack of metal deed boxes. 8 of them, olive green, the kind that solicitors' offices used in the early 20th century. Vera stepped inside. She set the flashlight on the table and unrolled the nearest document carefully. The paper was heavy, cream-colored, covered in typewritten text and handwritten notations in faded ink. At the top of the page, a provincial crest. Below it, Province of Ontario. Mining Claim Certificate, issued under the authority of the Mining Act, 1906. The date was 1907. She unrolled 2 more, same format, same date range, different parcel numbers. Her hands had started to tremble slightly. Not from the cold. She opened one of the deed boxes. Inside, a stack of folded papers, each one headed with a name. Ojibwe names, family names. Statements written in careful English documenting the terms under which mining rights to specific parcels had been promised, and then never formally registered. Beneath the statements, in a leather folder gone brittle with age, a handwritten ledger. Columns of names, dates, amounts. The names on the left were provincial land agents and mining surveyors. The names on the right, the recipients of the amounts, included a federal member of parliament, a district court judge, and 3 mining company directors, all dated between 1907 and 1912. Someone had paid officials to ensure that a set of legally registered Indigenous mining claims simply disappeared from the provincial record. And someone had kept every scrap of proof. Vera was standing very still, trying to absorb the weight of what she was looking at, when she heard the footstep in the corridor outside. Not the tick of a cooling building, a footstep. Deliberate, unhurried on the other side of the bookshelf door. She gripped the flashlight. She stood perfectly still as the bookshelf swung inward. Douglas Holt stepped through the opening, still in his charcoal wool coat, his silver cufflinks catching the light. He had a headlamp strapped to his forehead. The serious kind, high lumens, the kind you buy at a proper outdoor supply shop. In his right hand, held at his side like he'd carried one his whole life, was a hunting knife with a blade, roughly 6 inches long. "Mrs. Kowalski," he said with something that was trying to be a smile. "I have to admit, I underestimated you." Vera said nothing. She was looking at the knife. "I figured you'd strip whatever pipe was left and be gone by 4, he continued, glancing around the room, taking inventory of the deed boxes with the methodical calm of a man assessing property. The storm was inconvenient. "I've been waiting in my truck on a logging road about 3 kilometers east for going on 6 hours. He didn't sound angry about this. He sounded like a man discussing a scheduling inconvenience. "I also have to give you credit for finding the mechanism. That shelf hasn't moved since 1989. "You've been in here before," Vera said. "I've been trying to get in here for 4 years, Douglas said. "My great-grandfather built this lodge. The Holt family owned it until 1987. When my grandmother was dying, she told me about this room. She said her father had kept records behind the shelf in his office. She said if anyone ever found them, the family would lose everything." He took a slow step forward. "She was talking about the mining claims." "The Indigenous families," Vera said. Douglas looked briefly irritated, the way people do when someone names a thing they've been carefully not naming. "The claim certificates were never formally invalidated," he said. "They just vanished from the record." Which was fine for 100 years. But the current provincial government has land rights review processes running. Archivists have been going through old mining records. He looked at the deed boxes almost with a kind of reluctant admiration. The Holt Group has 14 active development projects in this district. Several of them sit on parcels that appear in those claim bundles. He paused. "My great-grandfather was a pragmatist. He kept everything. He thought documentation was power. He was right. He just didn't anticipate that the documentation would eventually be the thing that ended us." "How did you know the combination?" Vera asked. She was calculating distance to the door, whether she could get past him, how fast a person could move in a heavy coat and winter boots on a concrete floor. My grandmother gave it to me 30 years ago. I just never found the mechanism to open the shelf. He glanced at the pipe wrench in her hand. I assume you knocked it accidentally. She had caught the corner of the shelf while reaching past it for a wall cable, about 20 minutes before she'd decided to look more carefully. She had not thought anything of it at the time. "Put the wrench down," Douglas said. "I'm not going to hurt you if you're sensible. I'm going to take these documents and you're going to wait here until morning. The road will be open by then. You call whoever you like. Without the documents, you have a story about an empty concrete room in an abandoned lodge." "You were here before the storm," Vera said. "Your truck is on a logging road the OPP can locate." She paused. "And I have a phone." "You don't have a signal," Douglas said. "I checked. No tower coverage within 20 kilometers. He was right about that. She'd checked herself around 7 o'clock. "So put the wrench down," he said again, and took another step forward. Vera looked at him. She looked at the knife. She looked at the deed boxes and the rolled certificates and the leather ledger on the wooden table. She looked at the small candle flame still burning on the corner of that table, steady in the still air of the concrete room. Leonard's voice arrived clearly, the way it sometimes did now. "The best finds are always buried under the worst-looking rock, Vera. You dig and you dig, and when you finally get to the thing that doesn't look like anything, that's usually the one." She set the pipe wrench down on the table. Douglas visibly relaxed. Then Vera picked up the leather ledger with both hands and held it directly over the candle flame. A corner of the brittle cover caught the heat immediately, curling brown and sending a thin ribbon of grey smoke up toward the concrete ceiling. "This room has no ventilation," Vera said. Her voice was entirely calm. She found with a distant and faintly surprised part of herself that she meant every word she was about to say. "Leather burns badly and slowly. These deed boxes are steel, but the papers inside are 120 years old. This whole table goes up in under a minute, and we are standing behind a steel door inside a concrete room with one way out." She moved the ledger half an inch closer to the flame. Another curl of smoke rose between them. "I was a librarian for 34 years, Douglas. I know exactly how paper burns." The calm left his face completely. Underneath it was something much younger and much more frightened. "You'd die in here too." "My husband died in October," Vera said, looking directly at him over the flame. "The bank takes my house in 3 weeks. I have a pension that doesn't cover my groceries and a property that cost me my last $230 this morning." She did not look away from his eyes. "Tell me honestly, what do you think I'm protecting right now?" Douglas stared at her. The silence in the concrete room was absolute. "The knife," she said. He hesitated 3 full seconds. Then he crouched and placed the knife on the floor and slid it across the concrete toward her with the flat of his hand. It skittered under the edge of the table. "Step back into the corridor," Vera said, "past the shelf." He stepped back. She watched him the entire time, the ledger still suspended over the candle. "Father." He moved again. In one practiced motion, the motion of a woman who had spent 34 years returning heavy encyclopedia volumes to high shelves. Vera grabbed the pipe wrench, stepped through the doorway, and swung the bookshelf closed behind her. It latched with a clean mechanical click. She rammed the pipe wrench through the decorative iron handle on the manager's office side, jamming it hard against the doorframe. From behind the shelf, Douglas's voice came through muffled and furious. Then the impact of his shoulder against the wood. Once, twice. The bookshelf shuddered and held. Vera sat down in the green armchair with the leather ledger in her lap and waited for morning. The candle on the other side of the wall eventually burned out, but she had her flashlight. Douglas was uncomfortable but not in danger. The steel door was shut and the room was concrete. She sat quietly until the first grey light came under the manager's office door. And then she walked out through the lobby, past the lake trout with its clear glass eyes, and out into the cold blue morning. Her Subaru was buried to the door handles in drift snow. She found a signal 3 kilometers down the highway, standing on the shoulder of Highway 11 in the tire track of a passing transport truck. The OPP detachment from Engelhart arrived first. A second unit came from New Liskard. A sergeant named Beatrice Okafor helped Vera out of the drifted snow while her colleagues went inside with flashlights. Douglas Holt was removed from behind the bookshelf 40 minutes later, frostbitten and barely coherent, and transported to the hospital in Kirkland Lake. 2 days later, a representative from the Provincial Ministry of Indigenous Affairs and Northern Development sat at Vera's kitchen table in Timmins and explained that the certificates and the ledger had been sent to the Provincial Archivist's office in Toronto. The documents were not merely historical artifacts. They were legally operative. Several of the claim bundles had never been properly extinguished under Ontario's Mining Act. Combined with the documented evidence of official bribery, there was a viable pathway for the affected First Nations communities to pursue formal land restitution. The ministry representative said the words carefully. The way people say things they have been legally advised to say carefully, but his meaning was plain enough. A month after that, a letter arrived from a law firm in Thunder Bay. It was brief and precise. It explained that the Matagami First Nation, one of several communities whose families appeared in the recovered documents, had passed a band council resolution directing that a portion of any eventual land settlement be held in trust, specifically a finder's acknowledgement for the individual whose discovery had made the claim possible. The amount, once the trust was structured, would be sufficient to discharge a residential mortgage. Vera stood at her kitchen counter and read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and set it under the coffee mug, in exactly the spot where the foreclosure notice had been sitting. She went to the window and looked at the crooked birch tree in the front yard. Its branches were just beginning to bud, the very tips of them, the faint tentative green that appears in late April in northern Ontario, when the ground is still half frozen, but the light has finally decided to come back. She thought about Leonard in the basement with his trays of rock specimens, holding a piece of native silver up to the lamp with both hands and saying it like a simple fact about the world. The best finds are always buried under the worst-looking rock. He had been right about that. He had just been looking in the wrong direction. What would you have done, standing alone in that dark room with a knife on the floor and 120-year-old injustice in your hands? Tell me in the comments. I want to know. And if this story found you at the right moment, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to Claim the Drama. A new story drops every single week, and every one of them starts exactly here, with an ordinary person and an impossible moment.